Niels Kalin, a Swedish businessman, left Germany for Japan in 1932. He saw the direction the Nazi movement was taking, and he refused to salute the most sinister leader of the regime. In Japan, Niels went about his business managing the SKF subsidiary. He settled into Japanese life, learned the language, made friends, and enjoyed the country and work he had been presented. As Japan declared war on the United States, Niels knew he needed to protect the innocent. He was simply doing a job for a foreign company in a foreign country. Unlike others, he became an ambassador not only for Sweden, but for human rights. His bravery nearly cost him his life. Here, Fred Kalin is interviewed by George Prager, Holocaust survivor and an emeritus chair of the Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce.
Fred Kalin will tell you the stories of his late father, Niels Kalin. Fred, I knew your late father, Niels, very well because he founded the Swedish-Canadian Chamber of Commerce and I was a subsequent chairman. However, what I didn't know and what we're going to talk about today is your late dad's being in Japan and what additional duties he took on.
Yes, my father ended up in Japan working for SKF. After he got to Japan, he found, he was in a very different culture. He initially didn't understand the language. This was 1932. He wanted some more social contacts. My father volunteered in the Swedish embassy after he arrived in Japan in order to gain more social contacts. He found himself a little bit lonely there. And at first he was just doing routine duties. He was eventually given the title of vice consul. But after the war started, many countries withdrew their diplomatic legations from Japan, and Sweden was asked to represent those countries. And the Swedish ambassador did not want to do those duties, so he delegated those duties, and my father took over as acting ambassador for 9 countries, mostly European countries and also some South American countries. In addition to that, he was also asked to represent the League of Nations, to go in and inspect the Japanese prison camps. These are mostly civilian camps, but he needed to go in to inspect the camps to make sure that the prisoners were treated properly. And what he found was that the condition in the camps was horrific. He initially asked for better treatment, and he got laughed at. To the Japanese, it was considered dishonorable to ask for prisoners to ask for better treatment. So he had to change his tactics. He, by this point, was fluent in Japanese, and some of his Japanese friends had shown him how to act in a very authoritarian manner in Japanese. So he marched into the camps like he owned the place, and basically told the Kempeitai, the Japanese equivalent to the Gestapo, who ruled the camps, that they had to follow the rules of the Geneva Convention. This was pretty shaky ground, actually, because the rules of the Geneva Convention at the time only covered military prisoners. But the tactic worked, and the prisoners were treated better as a result.
It sounds to me that his behavior is very similar to the behavior which Raoul Wallenberg exhibited when talking to the Nazis in Germany to save as many Jews as he could. So I really see a parallel there. Fred, perhaps you could now tell me why your dad then chose to flee from Japan to go back to Sweden and his trip there.
One of the big things that was happening in Japan, of course, during the war was the bombing raids by the Americans. And he was very frightened to go down into the bomb shelters during the American air raids because the bomb shelters were ditches that were dug in the middle of the street. But of course the American bombing raids intensified, and in the night of March 9th to 10th, the Americans did a huge firebombing of Tokyo, and huge sections of the city were put on fire by gasoline bombs from the B-29 Super Fortress bombers. And he said the city had been transformed into a sea of white-hot flame. The death toll was much higher than Hiroshima or any other bombing raid in history. The result was that the Japanese started to become hostile against Westerners. And one day he was riding his motorcycle down the street towards one of the prison camps. He often ferried medicines. He met a convoy of Japanese army trucks going in the opposite direction. And one of the army trucks saw that it was a Westerner on a motorcycle and deliberately swerved his truck. And my father ran into the truck with a head-on collision and flew off his motorcycle and over the truck and landed on the road behind. And he managed to crawl off the road before another truck could run him over. He was then taken to a Japanese military army hospital. The doctor there looked at his arm and decided he had to amputate his arm. And my father, of course, objected. He didn't want his right arm amputated. But the doctor brought in soldiers to hold him down to the operating table. And my father was still objecting. And finally, he managed to knock the doctor out. He hit him with a left hook in the jaw. And of course, the incident ended there. My father ran out the door and escaped from that hospital. At this point, he had a badly injured right arm. He had many broken ribs. He wanted to save his right arm, so he decided he needed to travel back to Sweden to get surgery to save his right arm. He had a number of Japanese friends he could rely on. One of them was governor of Yokohama province, and so this friend signed a exit visa for my father to get out of Japan. Another friend worked in the Admiralty office and got him a passage on a ship getting out of Japan. My father had to leave Tokyo in secret because he knew the Japanese secret police, the Kempeitai, had been watching him. But after he left, one of his Swiss friends was interrogated to death by the Kempeitai. So he was glad that he left secretly. He went to the Japanese port of Shimonoseki and was put on board a Japanese ship, and the ship left together with two other ships going towards Korea. Halfway across, the ships were attacked by American torpedo bombers, and the bottom of the ship where he was in the hold started filling with water, and he took off his gold watch and gave that to the guard, and the guard completely ignored him. But as the hold filled with water, he was now up to his chest in water. The guard panicked and ran up the steps out of the hold and left my father there. So he thought he was going to drown. The hold filled further with water. He was up to his neck in water, and then the water started to recede again. So what happened was they got the pumps going on board the ship, and they managed to keep it afloat. And after about 24 hours, they arrived back in Japan, in Shimonoseki. And they had to, the next day, they had to try again, and they made it across. But this time he resisted. He refused to be locked into the hold of the ship on the way across. It's the Order of Olaf from the King of Norway. and the Order of Vasa from the King of Sweden. These were awarded to my father for his service in Japan. He was awarded this for saving many lives in the prison camps.
And it says here, åt Nils Kalin för långvarig trogen tjänst, which means to Nils Kalin for long time honorable service to the Kingdom of Sweden.
Yes, so
Beautiful.
he served in both Japan and in Canada.
Yes, I know.
If the Nazis were known for their unthinking brutality, the Japanese expansionist regime was equally guilty of human degradation. Beheadings, rape, starvation, and torture were their controlling acts. The Japanese leaders were not afraid to experiment with chemicals, drugs, and surgeries. Torture was a daily exercise. With this wave of fear constantly pounding the safe ship of reason, it is no surprise other countries left Japan, leaving Nils Kalin and the Swedish legation to protect the innocent. His efforts to fight for better internment conditions, providing whatever food and medicines he could, were acts of extraordinary bravery. Colleagues were tortured to death. He was a targeted man, but he continued his task. Don't forget, Nils Kalin arrived in Japan simply as a businessman. Escaping Japan safely as the war ended, Kalin made his way home to Sweden. On his way, even more unthinkable events were in store. Our next part of this story, as he moves through Russia, reveals even more interesting facts and episodes about this man and his fascinating life.